We've previously looked at the mathematical functions of sum, count, and average, and we have recently looked at the if statement. Where we can bring both of those together are in three magical formulas called Sumif, Countif, and Averageif. Taking our fruit data file, we have a set of data on the left here that goes all the way from A1 to A150, and it's a set of different types of fruit, how much of each fruit was bought on particular dates, and then from that date we can define the month and the year that that purchase was made. Now if we wanted to add up all the fruit that was sold, we would simply add up the quantity column. Where things get a little bit more complicated is if we only want to add up the fruit that was sold in January, for example, or in May, or in October. In order to do that, we would need to use the SUMIF function. Now over on the right here, there's a little table being prepared where we can use the SUMIF function to add up how much fruit was sold in January only. Ignoring completely what year it was sold, we're just interested in January. Now the syntax for the SUMIF is obviously an equals, SUMIF, open brackets, and then it requires three parameters. But what you will notice is that the third parameter here, the sum range, actually has square brackets around it. That means that it's optional. If we don't enter the sum range, so the range in which to add things up, then the first range value here acts as the criteria range and the sum range. In our case, they are two different ranges. Criteria range is this column here with the months in. So the range we would like to search in is D1 to D150, comma. The criteria is actually supplied by the label there. So we're going to take whatever label is there, in this case January, look that up in the D range, so all the way down this column that's been highlighted, and everywhere it finds January, so it finds one there, it will scroll down and find one further along. I would like it to come across to the column B and add up the value. So we put a comma, and then our sum range is B1 colon B150. Close our brackets. We've provided three criteria, press return, and it tells me that in January, and just January, we sold 67 items of fruit. Now, everything is relative, which means in theory, I can take this formula and replicate it to the bottom where December is. However, I cannot. And if you recall from the absolute lesson, we need to actually fix the ranges D to D150 and B to B150. Otherwise, as I move the formula down this list here, the range reference will move down the list. So it's a matter of putting in some dollar symbols to fix the whole range. Now you could type those dollars, so it would be $D, $1, colon, $D, $150, or we could use the clever little keyboard shortcut of F4. And you can see that that then puts the dollars in for me. And the same for the second range. Notice I haven't highlighted the whole range, just to demonstrate that if I do F4, it still knows to put it around the whole range. I'm not going to dollar the J2, which is referring to January, because when I copy this formula to this cell here, I want it to refer to February. And this cell here, I want it to refer to March. Now we can replicate that all the way down to December. And you can see that it then sums all the quantities, but only where the corresponding month value is equal to whatever the value is here. Now we can do a double check. That effectively adds up all the values for each month, giving me a total down here in the status bar of 925.4. So if I were to highlight all the quantities, it should add up to exactly the same thing, and it does, 925.4. So I know my double check works. So that's SUMIF, where you want to add up the values in a range, but only where they meet a set criteria. We also have Countif, equals COUNTIF, open brackets. Now this time the COUNTIF function only has a range and a criteria. So you can only count in the same column that you're running your criteria against. So if I want to count how many sales we had in January, then effectively I need to count the occurrence of January in the January column. My range is D1 colon D150, comma, and my criteria is still again that cell there. When I press return, it says there are 14 occurrences of January. Just as with the sum, I can't yet copy that formula down until I've absolute referenced the range. And then I can copy that down to December. And I see that there are 149 occurrences in total for all 12 months. And there are 149. To go from A2 all the way down to 150 is 149. So I know the count's working as well, and I could see in each month how many sales there have been, with July being the highest. The last of our clever mathematical and if together type functions is Averageif. So that's equals Averageif, open brackets. Just like the Sumif, it has a range, a criteria, and then an optional average range if your criteria is not on the same range. Well, it's not. The range criteria is the months. So that's D1, D150, comma, the month we're trying to find, and then the average range is the quantity column. So that's B1, B150. Just like the others, we need to absolute reference our ranges only because we're copying the formula. If you weren't copying the formula, there wouldn't be any purpose at all to making these absolute. So the two ranges get made absolute, but the month reference, the criteria, has to be relative so that when we copy the formula, it then looks at February, March, April. So let's bring that down, and we can see the average for each month of fruit that has been sold. Now we might just do a little bit of formatting to make that go to 2 decimal places, just so the end column is neat and tidy. Now one thing you might want to be able to attempt yourself is the filling in of these formulas that work out how many of each fruit has been sold. So both how many of each fruit, count how many fruit sales there have been, and then the average quantity for each fruit. You'll be able to do that by using the working file fruit data _ working file.